and welcome back to Music from Home, a series of videos by Yakima Symphony Orchestra musicians. My name is David McLemore. I'm the principal tubist of the Yakima Symphony, as well as the professor of tuba and euphonium at Central Washington University. If you think of brass instruments as being like a family tree, then each of the four orchestral brass, trumpet, horn, trombone, tuba, they are each of them an arm that splits off from the trunk of the tree. Now each of these arms is essentially a family in and of itself that's going to have its own series network of branches that break off from it. And you could think of these individual branches or limbs as specific instruments, specific types of trumpets, horns, trombones, or in our case, tubas. In this video, I want to go through several of the instruments which make up the tuba family and how they differ from one another. In addition to being the lowest sounding member of the brass family, tubas are also the youngest member of the family. We can trace examples of the trumpet, horn, or trombone, or their immediate predecessors being used for hundreds of years in the classical period, or in the Baroque period, or the Renaissance, or even before then. The tuba, on the other hand, is not even 200 years old yet. Perhaps owing to its youth, the tuba is far less standardized in its appearance and its construction, at least compared to other members of the brass family. Let's begin by talking about valves. There are two basic types of valves, rotary valves and piston valves. As I discussed in my previous Music from Home video on the physics of brass playing, valves, whether they be rotary valves or piston valves, they essentially function like plumbing. We're redirecting airflow and vibration, changing the overall length of the instrument. The difference, of course, is how this redirection occurs. With rotary valves, such as here, we essentially have rotational motion. Inside this valve casing, the body of the valve rotates, and that causes the airflow to be redirected. Now, with piston valves, the movement is not rotational, but rather the movement is vertical. So when the valve is depressed, the air is sent through the tubing. There are, typically speaking, three configurations for tubas, which we associate with very specific geographical locations. There are American-style tubas, there are British-style tubas, and there are German-style tubas, which we generally call Kaiser tubas. This is an example of an American-style tuba. American-style tubas tend to feature front-facing piston valves. So the valves are in front of the instrument, they face forward, and they're piston valves usually. Although, as you'll see here, this has a rotary fifth valve. Now notice that the bell points slightly to my left. The left hand essentially holds the instrument in place, while the right hand and arm wrap around the instrument. The fingers go to the valves. Now, German-style Kaiser tubas are in some ways very similar to American-style tubas in that they have front-facing valves. The bell, once again, points to the player's left. The right hand and arm essentially wrap around the outer bow of the instrument, bringing the fingers to the valves. But Kaiser tubas, generally speaking, use rotary valves. They don't use piston valves. Now, British-style tubas are interesting. They have some interesting similarities and differences. The first one that maybe is obvious is it probably looks a little mirrored compared to the other two tubas I've described. British-style tubas and euphoniums, they face to a player's right, not to a player's left. So the instrument points that way, not that way. Another obvious difference, the valves are not out front. The valves are upright. They're up over here. And so it is not the right arm that wraps around and hugs the instrument. It's actually my left arm that comes around front and hugs the instrument and holds it in place. Like American-style tubas and euphoniums, British-style instruments have piston valves. Now, in addition to these various configurations, there are also just general voicings of tuba. We could describe tubas as being contrabass tubas, bass tubas, and tenor tubas, almost thinking like male voices in a choir. You have contrabass, bass, and tenor. So let's look at these different types of tubas, and let's hear what they sound like. Contrabass tubas are the most common type of tuba that you will see in a concert ensemble like a symphony orchestra or a concert band. They range in length from 16 to 18 feet. And they come in two basic keys, B-flat tubas and C tubas. B-flat contrabass tubas are 18 feet in length, and contrabass tubas in C, like this one, are 16 feet in length, and they sound, again, a whole step higher, so the tubing is just slightly shorter. Contrabass tubas have the fullest, broadest sound of the tuba family, particularly in the middle to low register, or as one of my teachers used to refer to it, the cash register. This breadth of sound almost gives the instrument the character of an organ pedal. Now, clarity and nimbleness are a bit more of a challenge on this instrument. Solo and ensemble music for the tuba wasn't really written before 1940, so we have barely 80 years of repertoire for us to perform. So if we want to play anything pre-20th century, we have to borrow it. Here's an example of that. This is the C minor Gigue taken from Johann Sebastian Bach's Fifth Cello Suite. So let's move on to bass tubas. They're used less frequently, but occasionally in orchestras and military bands. They're pretty common in chamber music and solo music, where a narrower, nimbler, more focused tuba sound is desired. The range on these instruments tends to be 12 to 13 feet, and there's two keys for bass tubas. Bass tubas in E flat and F. So E flat bass tubas are 13 feet in length, and F tubas, again, pitched a whole step higher, just a little bit shorter at 12 feet. So the bass tuba retains the core and the fundamental character of a tuba sound, but it doesn't quite have the breadth and resonance, or the width, of a contrabass tuba. It doesn't quite fill the space as much. Low register access can also be a bit more problematic. However, for what is lost in resonance and low register access, we gain in terms of having a clearer, more nimble sounding instrument, and also more effortless access to the upper register, to playing higher notes. So here's another borrowed work, this time taken from the bassoon repertoire. This is an excerpt from the second movement of Telemann's Sonata in F minor. Euphoniums, also known as baritones or baritone horns, they appear seldomly within the orchestra, but they are very common in concert bands and military bands and wind ensemble repertoire. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, tenor tubas, euphoniums like this, are 9 feet in length and they sound more or less at the same pitch level as a tenor trombone. So again, tenor trombone, because it's in the trombone family, tenor tuba, because it's in the tuba family. In fact, not only is the euphonium pitched the same as a tenor trombone, they often use similar, if not identical, mouthpieces in terms of the rim size, the shank size. You can actually put a euphonium mouthpiece into a trombone, or a trombone mouthpiece into a euphonium, and play. Now, some tubists, like myself, will double on euphonium and can play tenor tuba parts when needed. I, in particular, try to do this because I'm an educator. Like I said, I'm a professor. I teach more than just tuba students. I also teach euphoniums. However, there are times in the orchestra when tenor tuba parts are called for where the euphonium will be played not by tubists, but rather by members of the trombone section, most commonly the principal. So here is a borrowed work from the trumpet and cornet repertoire. This is an excerpt taken from the Fantasy and Variations on the Carnival of Venice by Baptista Arbonne. Now again, we tuba players, euphonium players, love to borrow music because we like playing things from before 1940. Again, music has only been written for us for the last 80 years or so. With that in mind, and mimicking the habits of other brass instruments like trombones and horns, who tend to play often vocal arrangements of choir music for their family of instruments, here is an arrangement of Gabriel Fauré's Pie Jesu, taken from his Requiem, for tuba and euphonium quartet. Thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit about the tuba family of instruments. In my next Music from Home video, I'll be discussing how some of these instruments are used within orchestras, such as the Yakima Symphony. I hope to see you again in the concert hall very soon.